This is Gemara Baba Kama Daf Ayin Aleph. Agun Chodesh, and for one last day as we begin the month of Shvat, we like to dedicate today's learning as an incredible schos Aliyas Neshama for Yalib ben Yaakov B'siyat D'Shmaya. The learning of the entire Chabura should bring Yalib ben Yaakov closer and closer to the Kisei HaKavod, the Amelit Yeshar and his entire family, and on the entire Chabura. We're holding on Ayinam and Beis. We're 4 lines from the Y lines, Rava Amar. And we're in the middle of a lengthy discussion. And we're trying to figure out how we could have a case in which the clash of the kinyan of the Geneva does not coincide necessarily with the Malachas Shabbos. As the Mishnah said, Ganav umachar b'Shabbos, the Mishnah taught us that there is Tashlumei Dalad Vehei. And the question is the classical Kimle B'dirabba Minei, as the Gemara quoted a Braisa that said, Potter, if he stole an animal and sold it on Shabbos, there's no Tashlumim. So the final attempt that we ended with was maybe we're going with the Shita of Rabbi Akiva that says, Kluta Kamisha Uncha Damya, and he said to throw the Geneva into my Chatzir. Because according to the Rabbanan, once it reaches the Chatzir, there is a kinyan, but regarding to Shabbos, you're not chayiv until it reaches the ground. So says the Gemara, no. Maybe the Bais is referring to where the person purchasing the item said there should not be a kinyan until it rests. So Rava comes along and Rava tries to give another explanation how we could reconcile the Braisa with the Mishnah. Says Rava Lo'ilam Kirami Barachama. Really, we're going to stick with Rami Barachama to highlight Rami Barachama. 1 second. Says Rava, Rami Barachama was the first pshat that he said, Kitania he depater ba'omer loi akert li teinachem miteinasiv tikni li gneva seich. But now explains Rava, but how can we make it fit with Rami Barachama? 3 lines from the Y lines. Esnan asar atayra va'afilu ba'alimai. The din of an esnan is a different din. The din of an esnan is that the payment, the animal or whatever is used in exchange for the znos, the Torah asers, even in a scenario of ba'alimai. However, vitava leikaman bedina. Now, what will happen if the mother wants to sue the child in Bezdin in order that he pays the agreed upon esnan? He says, I'll give her something for the maisas in us. Do we tell him, Kom havla esnan? Would we tell her to go pay? Of course not. Ela af al gav. So rather, what's the yisoid, says the Gemara? Af al gav. Bedina, even though she could be Tevea in Bezdin, we would never tell him to go pay her. Kivan the Chiyahiv law, what's the Nikuda? What's the reason we wouldn't tell him to go pay her? Because when he gives it to her, Kivan the Chiyahiv law, have esnan. It gets the din of the esnan. It gets the din that it is aser, and therefore will never enforce. Bezdin will never tell someone to do something which will have a din of an iser. And therefore what? That's almost the mashal. Hachanami. Here also in our case, that someone sells an animal in the scenario by picking figs, by picking fruit on Shabbos. Afal gav delini tashlumin itave bedina kaman lo yamrin enzel shlim. If the buyer says to the ganif that come to vabedina lo yamrin alei, we would never tell the ganif go and pay him. Afal ilu hachi. Even still, when we turn over to Ayin Aleph Amid Aleph, afilu hachi, says the Gemara, kivan. Meaning, the fact that we in Bezdin would not require such a tashlumim the fact that we in Bezdin would not tell him that he should go pay does not change the fact that there is a kinyan in this case. So says the Gemara, Filoachi Kivan, to Kamaktile Ba'achi, when he does indeed give over the animal for the payments of the things that he took, have a machira will be a machira, even though the act of Chil Shabbos negates the sale. But because if he would have done it, would be Chal, that's the reason why in the Mishnah there would be Tashlume Dalid Vehei. We continue on the second line of Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph. The Gemara quotes the next part of the Mishnah. Ganavu Tavach B'Yom Kippurim. If he stole, or if he sold, or he slaughtered, he shechted the animal on Yom Kippur, says the Mishnah, this as well, the Tashlumei Dalad Vehei. So Amai, what's the reason why there's such Tashlumim? Nei de Katlam. I understand that there's no death penalty, there's no katala. Bezdin would never impose misa for being mechalal Yom Kippur, but yet malchus miyayika. But there is a din of malchus, and therefore what? Similar to the rule of kimle b'diramine, but in a little bit of a different fashion. The rule is that anytime there's a malchus, there's no tashlumim. So how can you tell me that in this scenario that he didn't get malchus for that which he did, he has to pay dalad vehei? Answers the Gemara, Amri Hamani Rabbi Meir. He 5 lines down. This is going with Shitas Rabbi Meir. The Amar Loik Yom Mishalim. He argues on the premise. Says Gemara, really, Rabbi Meir Afilu Tavach b'Shabbos? According to Rabbi Meir, it should be the same thing if he's Tavach b'Shabbos. So why does the Mishnah say that in the case of Tvicha b'Shabbos, he's going to be potter? This is going to be coming up in the Mishnah in a few daf. Says the Gemara, maybe Rabbi Meir only argues with regarding Malchus. Malchus, he holds, could have a tashlumim, but maybe not Misa. And of course, in the scenario that there was a Tvicha on Shabbos, there is Misa, he's Machal Shabbos. Says the Gemara, really? Does he not hold the both? In all these cases, in all these cases, Rameir holds your chayiv. So says the Gemara, Amri, bar minei dahi, leave that brisa out. Why should we leave that brisa out? They all explain this brisa. Amri, the reason why there's a chiyuv in that case, according to Rameir, is where the tvicha was done al yedei acher. He himself did not shecht the animal, and therefore he is not the one that's going to be chayiv misa, and that's the reason why he's going to be tashlumim of dalad behei. V'chi asked the Gemara, excuse me, where did our page of Gemara just go? There it goes. Says the Gemara, 1 second. V'chi zeh chaytiv, zeh mischayiv. Says the Gemara, 1 second, how could this be? Based on what you just said, this guy stole an animal, and then he told his friend to shech the animal. Gevaldik. So his friend shechted the animal on Shabbos, unfortunately. So his friend is chayiv misa, and his friend should also be chayiv dalad vehei if there's tashlum dalad vehei in such a scenario. What is the reason that we're saying that this guy that stole it, he's chayiv dalad vehei for the action of his friend? Amar Rava, shiny hachad Amar Kra. The Torah says v'tavcha yumachroi ma mechira yidei acher av tvicha al yedei acher. A special Xeris Haikosov teaches us that if someone has someone else shecht or sell an animal that he stole, he is still incurring the payments of a dalid vehei. That's going to be the first way of explaining the Mishnah. Continues the Gemara, another way of explaining Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, Oy, the Rabbi says a shliach. The word Oy comes to include a shliach in this scenario. Excuse me, not a second way of explaining the Mishnah, but a second and third way of explaining while there'll be a chiyuv, even in the case of shliach. Normally, obviously, ain't shliach l'dvar aveira, but over here there would be a chiyuv dalad vehei if one had the shliach shecht for him. So Maskiv La Mar Zutsha continues the Gemara. We're about 8 lines from the wide line. The first word line is Maskif. 10 lines from the wide lines. Maskiv La Mar Zutsha Mika Midi Tilo Avidiu Lo Mechayev Avishech Mechayev. Says the Gemara, how is what we just said possible? You just taught me that if he would do it himself, he wouldn't be chayev. Why? Because it's Shabbos, and therefore you can't be chayev misan tashlumim. So how could it be that if he wouldn't do it, he would not be chayev dal v'hei? But now that someone else did it, he is chayev dal v'hei. Amrei Rav Hashi Hasam Lam Mishum Dolim Mechayevu. Hello, Dikim Lev Ravine. Says, what do you mean? Of course you're chayev. Just happens to be you're going to get killed, so therefore there's no din of tashlumim, and therefore excuse me, and that's the reason why according to Rameir, the din would work if someone else did it for you. Says Gemara, 1 second, but if you shechted to do someone else, right to the Rabbanan de Patri. So now what is the reason according to the Rabbanan? We flipped the tables over here. Now l'chayra, it's pasha, you should be chayiv dal v'hei. Why do the Rabbanan hold your pater? Amri man chachamim is Rav Shimon damar shchita she'ena ru'ya loy shema shchita. The shchita of Rav Shimon, that a shchita which is not ru'ya is not called a shchita. Any time that post the shchita, you can't actually eat the animal, doesn't have a din of a shchita. Doesn't have a din of a shchita. So says the Gemara, Amri, Bish, Lamavodah Zara, Bishar Haniskol, Shchita She'ena Ruya. Remember, we quoted a whole list of cases. If we go up to the top of the Amid, quote a whole list of cases of shachting the Shar Niskal, which is the ox that's condemned to be stoned. Shachting Avodah Zara, and one of them was our case of shachting after stealing an animal. So says the Gemara, I understand that Avodah Zara and Shar Niskal, it's a shchita she'ena ruya because the animals are not able to be eaten. Ella, asked the Gemara, Ella Shabbos, shchita ruya. If someone has his friend shach the animal from on Shabbos, it is a good shchita. Ditinan. We learned in a Mishnah Sheichet b'Shabbos u'b'Yom HaKippurim Afal Pisha b'Chayev bin Nafshoi Shchitas Sheira. It was a terrible thing to do, and you're Chayev Isa. Bala Ma'isa, the Shchita is a good Shchita. So according to Rav Shimon, is a good Shchita. Says the Gemara Amri. Sarvla Rav Yochanan Sandler Titanan. Says Rav Yochanan Sandler Mavashal b'Shabbos b'Shoyeh Yochal b'Mezeh Lo Yochal Devrei Meir. We learned in a Mishnah. What is the story of someone who cooks on Shabbos? Who's done by accident, says Rav Meir, you're allowed to eat it. But if it's done on purpose, you cannot. Rav Yehuda says Rav Yehuda, V'shagig, you could eat it, yochal. But might say Shabbos, but only after Shabbos. B'mezeh lo yochal alamnas. V'yochal asander oimer. V'shagig, yochal l'moisei Shabbos. L'acheirim v'loy loy. Other people can eat it after Shabbos. B'mezeh lo yochal alamnas. Loi loi veloy la'acheirim. So Shimon is going within the opinion of Rav Yochanan Sandler, and that's why he says he gets the din of a shchita she'ena ru'uya. He gets the din of a shchita she'ena ru'uya because according to Rav Yochanan Sandler, no one can eat this animal. Says the Gemara, my time of Rav Yochanan Sandler. Where did Rav Yochanan Sandler say this din, this far-reaching kinas that if it's b'shogeg, it can only be eaten for other people Motzei Shabbos? But if it's amazing, no one can eat it. K'dar shavchia pischa devei nisa v'shamartem es Shabbos ki kodesh hilachem ma kodesh asur b'achila af ma'isa Shabbos asura b'achila. That's how Rav Yochanan Sandler learns that ma'isa Shabbos you cannot eat. Ima kodesh asur b'hana ma'isa Shabbos asur b'hana. Says more 1 second. If we're learning it out from Kachim, it should have an isra hana as well. Tamaloimer lachem shalachem yihei. And that's the reason why Rav Shimon is going to go with the opinion of Yochanan Sandler, and that's why it's going to be a shchita she'ena ru'uya. Once you brought in Rav Yochanan Sandler, which of course was a lengthy discussion we had in Masechah Shabbos with regard to Ma'aseh Shabbos, someone by accident cooks on Shabbos or on purpose, the 3 shitas Rav Meir, Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yochanan Sandler. But now comments the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom of the Amid. Pliba Ravacha v'Ravina. Ravacha and Ravina disagree regarding this opinion of Rav Yochanan Sandler. in the fact of Chadam or Meisa Shabbos Deraisa, of Chadam Meisa Shabbos Derabanan. Mandam Deraisa Kedamaran, as we just saw, we quoted the pasuk of Shemarta Meisa Shabbos. Mandam Derabanan Amar Kodesh who Kodesh who says the Torah it should be Kodesh. Kodesh who in Meisa of Kodesh, but the actions will not be Kodesh. So according to that Manda Amar, it's not learned out from the Torah. Beishal Mandam Deraisa. I understand because of this, as we turn over, Tayin Aleph Amid Beis Amtu Lahachi Pati Rabbanon. And now, if you're going to say that it's going to be a din daraisa, then it makes sense. Why Pati Rabbanon? Look at the top Rashi. Rashi explains that what's the reason Rabbanon are Pati from Daled Vehei, bringing this back full circle, as we said, because Shechita Sheina Ruya. The reason is because the shechita sheina ruya, according to Rav Shimon, because midaraisa the shechita is no good. But asks the Gemara on the top line of Ayin Aleph Mebeis Alamandamad Rabbanan Amai Patri Rabbanan. Answers the Gemara Shaira. It's going really in the other case of a Zara Veshar Haniskel. I mean, the whole kash that we started with was that 1 second. By Avodah Zara and Shar Niskel, understand that it's shechita sheina ruya. But what about on Shabbos? We try to suggest we're going within the opinion of Shimon, which brought us that Rav Shimon goes within the opinion of Yochanan and Sandler. But now the Gemara is concluding, according to the Rabbanan, you can just say that we're going only within the opinions of the Brisa of Shar Niskal and Azara and not on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, let's delve a little bit deeper into the aforementioned Brisa. According to Rameir, why is there a chiyuv for Daled Vehei if someone shechs the animal for Avodah Zarah? Came on the Shachaba Porta, once you shecht it a little bit, Asra, first moment you do a part of the Maisa Shechita, Avodah Zarah, the animal becomes Asr. And Idach, Isuri Hanahu, and therefore the rest of the act of the Shechita does what? Makes the animal Asr Behana. So it's not considered that the owner shechted his own animal, and therefore there should be no tashlume daled vehei. It's like he shechted someone else's animal, an animal that was asr bahana. Amar Rava explains, Rava 6 lines down in Aleph Mebeis. Be'oimar, the case is begamar zvicham hu oivda. The case is where he shechted the avodah zara only with the shechted for avodah zara only with the gemar, the completion of the act of shechita. As Rashi says, avodah zara hu oivid begemar zvicha v'loy b'tchila. At the beginning, he just did a ma'isa shechita. At the end of the ma'isa shechita, he had a mind for avodah zara. So it didn't become asar b'hana yet. That's the reason why there'll be tashlumim. Daled Vehei. Says Mar, okay, what about the case of Shar Niskal? Shar Niskal Isura Ninu, the animal which is going to be stoned is by its very nature Asr Behana, Lav de Mariko Tavach. And therefore it's not considered that he shechted an animal belonging to the owner. So why there Tashlumei? Daled Vehei. Amar Rav Achamay Eskina and Gon Shemasu L'Shaimer. The case is where the owner of the ox gave over the ox to a Shaimer. The Hizig Bebeis Shaimer, and the ox killed someone while it was in the possession of the Shaimer. V'hu ad Bebeis Shaimer, and they brought the ox to Bezdin, and they testified while in the possession of the Shaimer that the ox indeed killed, and the ox has a status of a muad. V'nigmar dinai Bebeis Shaimer, and they paskined on the animal while it was in the possession of the Shaimer. And that's where the Ganav came and stole the animal. The Rameir Savar like Rav Akiva, Savar like Rav Shimon. Savar like Rav Akiva Damar. Av Mishanigmar Dino Yechziru Shaimer Labailim Muchzar. He also like Rav Yaakov that if Lamais the Shaimer takes his animal and returns it to the owner, it's considered to be returned, and that's the reason why it is indeed considered to be his animal when he shechs it, even though it has aser behana. And the like Rav Shimon Damar Davar Agoyrim Lamamain Kimamain Dami. Something that causes money has a din of a money, and that's the reason why in this case there'll be payments of Daled Vehei, even when it's shechted Lavoida Zara. Ditanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, Shimon Aimer Kachim Shechayv Achriyasan chayiv. Alma davar garm the mamain kimamain dummy. And that concludes the shita of Rameir as he holds that if you shech lav edazar, there's going to be a chiyuv dalid vahei. Amar Rav Kahana continues the Gemara quoting the opinion of Rav Kahana. We're about 12 lines for the white lines and Ayin Alpha base. The first one line is Amar. Amar Rav Kahana Amrita L'Shemaita Kameid Rav Zvid min Nahardai. I said this over in front of Rav Zvid from Nahardai. Mi Matis Mokmis Mastisik Rameir. And I asked, can it's really possible to say the Mishnah is like Rameir v'loiker of Shimon? V'akatani Seifa Rabbi Shimon Amr b'Shnei Elu Mechlal. The end of the Mishnah says, Rav Shimon says, in the last two cases, you're potter. Sounds like Rav Shimon holds the rest of the case of the Mishnah, you're indeed Maida, he's chayiv. So it sounds like you're going to opinion of Rav Shimon, not Rameir. Amar lei. So again, this is Rav Kahana talking in front of Rav Zvid. So Rav Zvid responded, Loi mechlal da Maida b'tavach u'machar, the Rafua ule klavim. Says Gemara, says Rav Zid, no. Bechlal Damaida means he only agrees in the case where it was sold the Tavach Umachler Refuah the Klavim, but not necessarily in the whole first half of the Mishnah. We continue 8 lines from the white lines at the 2 dots. Ganav, Mishal Aviv, Tavach Umachar. Then what happens? Then the father is Nifter, he still has Tashlumei Dalad Vei. So the Gemara begins with a Shaila, and really with this we're going to end the Shir. Ba'i Minei, Rava Mirav Nachman. Ganav Shar Shal Shnei Shotvim V'Tavchai. Someone steals a shar that's owned by 2 people, and then he slaughters it. V'Haidai La'echad Mihem, and he admits to one of the 2 people to that which he did. Ma'u, what's the halacha? So explains the Gemara 4 lines from the white lines. What's the shayla? Chamisha bakar amar achmana v'lo chamisha chatzi bakar. The Torah says you have to pay dalid vehei 4 or 5 times. So you have to pay 5 times, but not 5 half bakar. So the fact they only admitted half, therefore, maybe there is not going to be tashlumim in such a scenario. Oidelma chamisha bakar amar achmana v'afilu chamisha chatzai bakar. Sumara wants to know fundamentally in a scenario in which he admits to part, as Rashi 3 lines at the bottom says, and Moide Bekenas is going to be potter. So the part that he admitted to, he's potter. The question is, what about to be Machayevim on the other half that Eidim testified on? Do we say that there is a din of Chamisha Chatzi Bakar or not? Amar Le Rav Nachman responds in the last narrow line, Chamisha Bakar Amar Achman v'lo Chamisha Chatzi Bakar, but not half, but not 5 half Bakar. We're going to stop over here. Siyat Shemai, the next year we'll pick up with a kasha from Rava on Rav Nachman in Mirza Hashem.